Before you read this story, I want you to ask yourself a question. What is the most unshakable part of your identity? Is it your name, your birthplace, the color of your skin, or the long and sorrowful history of your ancestors? Now, imagine you were stripped of all of that. Imagine you were placed in a world where your very existence was a crime, where your heritage was a myth, and your intelligence a threat. Who would you be then? This is the story of a man, a cowboy, who thought he knew exactly who he was and what he wanted. He sent for a gentle, agreeable wife, a quiet woman to keep his home and soothe his soul. He was a man of the American West, a place defined by its harsh beauty and even harsher rules. He was raised on a foundation of manifest destiny, a belief that the land and its rules belonged to him and his kind. But the world has a way of laughing at our expectations, of delivering the exact opposite of what we think we need. This is not a story of a simple mail order bride. This is a story of a collision of worlds, a clash of wills, and a love that was never supposed to happen. It's a story about a man who, in searching for a gentle spirit, found a warrior. And it was in that unexpected discovery that he finally learned the truth about his own soul. Prepare to have your expectations shattered, just as his were, with every turn of the page. The telegram paper was flimsy and yellowed, the ink already starting to blur at the edges. It was the only thing of value I owned, aside from a saddle worn smooth by my own backside and a ranch that was more dust and dreams than profit. I'd held on to it for 2 months, a physical promise folded into a neat square, and I traced the words for the 100th time. Wanted, strong man, gentle woman to keep his home. Reply Box 14, Cheyenne. A part of me, the part that sat alone in the dark of my cabin listening to the coyotes howl, was shamed by that word. Gentle. I had replied, describing a life of hard work, open skis, and a quiet sort of loneliness. I'd asked for a woman who was even-tempered, kind, and who wouldn't mind the wind. I described myself, perhaps too honestly, as a man who was more comfortable with the earth and the cattle than with people. I wanted a partner, I told myself, not a passion. I wanted a presence to fill the empty space on the other side of the supper table, a warm body to share the long, cold winters, a simple, manageable life. The reply came 3 weeks later, a short, businesslike letter written on fine paper. The woman, a Miss Eleanor Vance from Boston, was a school teacher. She wrote of her desire for a new life, a simpler life away from the pressing conformity of the city. She spoke of a love for nature and a willingness to learn. She was quiet, she was agreeable, she was exactly what I asked for. I sent for her a simple, wordy telegram that cost me a month's wages. Come, stop. We'll meet train. Stop. Be ready for hard work. Stop. Standing on the platform of the Cheyenne station, I felt a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my gut. The train whistle announced its arrival, a shrieking metallic sound that seemed to pierce the very sky. I tugged at the collar of my best shirt, a stiff thing I only wore for funerals and weddings. And now this. My boots were polished, my beard was trimmed, and I had a small bouquet of prairie wildflowers in my hand that I'd picked that morning. My heart hammered a nervous, stupid rhythm against my ribs. I saw her before she saw me. She was the only woman descending the steps who looked utterly out of place. The other women were sturdy, weathered, dressed for the West, but Miss Eleanor Vance was a vision of a different world. Her dress was a rich, dark blue, a fabric too fine for this dust bowl, and a hat with a small, defiant feather adorned her head. But it wasn't the clothes that made me catch my breath. It was the look on her face as she stepped onto the wooden platform. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was a look of dawning, almost violent recognition, as if she'd just found a piece of herself she'd thought was lost. Her eyes, a shade of green that reminded me of the new leaves on the cottonwood trees, swept over the crowd and then settled on me. And just as quickly, that look was gone, replaced by a carefully crafted, almost fragile smile. Mr. Thomas, her voice was a melodic, lilting thing, soft, gentle. I took my hat off, a clumsy gesture. Yes, ma'am, Thomas Gray, you must be Miss Vance. She offered a gloved hand, which I took with a hesitancy that was foreign to me. Her hand was small, but her grip was surprisingly firm. Eleanor, please. Mr. Gray, it is a pleasure to finally meet you. She said the words, but her eyes were already moving, taking in the station, the horizon, the dust that was already clinging to her beautiful dress. The journey home was a quiet one. She sat beside me in the wagon, her posture perfect, her hands clasped in her lap. The wildflowers lay forgotten in the back, their colors muted in the gathering dusk. I tried to make conversation, pointing out the landmarks, a distant herd of antelope, the way the setting sun painted the plains in shades of gold and blood. She listened, nodding politely, her eyes holding an unsettling stillness. She was the picture of a perfect, gentle lady. But the feeling that had settled in my gut was not the comfortable warmth of a simple life beginning. It was the prickling, uneasy feeling of a man who just looked into a still lake and seen something looking back. That first night, as we sat in the small, tidy kitchen of my cabin, the silence was a heavy, tangible thing. I had worked so hard to make the place presentable. The floor was swept, the table was set with my mother's old china, and I'd even managed to find a few wild daisies to put in a tin cup. I had wanted to show her my world, my simple, honest world. But as I watched her delicate fingers touch the rim of the chipped mug I'd given her, I realized she was seeing something else entirely. The house is very, she paused, searching for the right word, sturdy. Yes, ma'am, built it myself. It's kept the wind out for 5 years. And the isolation, she continued, her tone still light and observation more than a complaint. It must be profound. She was looking out the small window into the endless, star-dusted black. It's quiet, I said defensively, gives a man time to think. She turned her eyes to me then, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something else. It wasn't the gentle, agreeable nature I'd been promised. It was a sharp, intelligent curiosity. And what is it you think about, Mr. Gray, during all that quiet time? The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth, a ready platitude on my lips, but the words died there. What did I think about? The past, the future, the aching loneliness of it all. My work, I finally managed. The herd, the weather. A man's life is full of practical concerns. She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Of course, practical concerns. It is a great comfort, I imagine, to have such a defined set of duties. For the next few weeks I lived in a state of quiet confusion. She was the perfect homemaker. The cabin was cleaner than it had ever been. My meals, which had once been a haphazard affair of beans and burnt coffee, were now palatable, even delicious. She never complained, not once, about the hard work, the isolation, or the harsh, unyielding wind. She was, in every tangible way, the gentle woman I had asked for. But there was a shadow in her eyes, a deep well of something I couldn't name. I'd find her standing on the porch at dawn, her gaze fixed on the endless horizon as if she were searching for a door in the empty space. She'd walk the perimeter of the property, not in a leisurely, curious way, but with a purposeful stride, her head turning, cataloging the land. She'd ask me questions, sharp questions about the old homesteaders, the battles that had been fought in the area, the names of the creeks and the buttes, and they weren't the questions of a simple, curious woman. They were the questions of a scholar, a historian, a person desperate to understand a place that was simultaneously terrifying and mesmerizing. The breaking point came, appropriately enough, with a book. I had stepped inside after a long day in the saddle and found her at the table, a heavy, leather-bound volume open in front of her. She was writing furiously in a small journal, her brow furrowed in concentration. I recognized the book. It was a discarded, outdated history of the Plains Indian Wars that had belonged to my own father. It was filled with the same kind of grand, patriotic, racist nonsense that I'd grown up with. A history of savages and brave pioneers, of manifest destiny and civilizing the wilderness. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment. She didn't notice me, so deep was her focus. Then she slammed the book shut and let out a sound I'd never heard her make. It wasn't a scream, but it was close. A sharp, frustrated cry of pure, unadulterated rage. I cleared my throat. Everything all right, Alina? She whirled around, her eyes blazing, the mask of the gentle lady gone. No, Mr. Gray, everything is not all right. She held up the book as if it were a snake. This book, it is a lie, a vicious, calculated lie. I shifted my weight, uncomfortable. It's just a history book, Alina. It's a part of our past. Our past, she scoffed, the word tasting of acid. Yours, perhaps, not mine. My past does not speak of deserving a land that was not ours to take, of erasing a people because they were in the way. I felt a prickle of irritation. Times were different then. The country was being settled. There were conflicts. Conflicts, she repeated, the word dripping with sarcasm. Is that what you call it? The systematic destruction of a culture, the slaughter of women and children, the theft of land that had been theirs for centuries. She took a step toward me, and I instinctively took one back. I had faced down stampeding cattle and cantankerous bulls, but the force of her conviction was more intimidating than any beast. You've been here for 3 weeks, Alina, I said, my voice dangerously low. You don't know the history of this place. You don't know the hardships. I know enough, she shot back. I know what it's like to be a stranger, to be a trespasser in a land that doesn't want you, to be told your very existence is a crime. Her voice cracked, and I saw a vulnerability in her that had been hidden all along. The anger was a shield, and behind it was a profound, agonizing sorrow. Your existence is not a crime, Alina. You're my wife, I said, the words feeling hollow and wrong in my mouth. By law, yes, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. By paper, but in my soul I am still Alina Vance. And the woman you sent for, the gentle woman, she doesn't exist. She was a ghost I created to survive. She gestured around the room, her hand trembling. But I cannot live a lie anymore. I will not be a quiet ornament to your manifest destiny. I didn't know what to say. Every word I had for her, every platitude and practical truth I'd relied on my whole life, crumbled in the face of her raw pain. She was sobbing now, silent tears tracking paths through the dust on her cheeks. It wasn't a woman's tears of helplessness. It was the weeping of a soul that had held itself together for far too long. I walked over to the window, my back to her, staring out at the darkness. The wind was picking up, a low, mournful howl that seemed to echo the turmoil inside my own heart. I had asked for a gentle woman. I had wanted a simple life. But as I stood there in my quiet cabin with this fiercely intelligent, deeply troubled woman crying in my kitchen, I knew that I had gotten neither. I had gotten something far more complicated, and something far more real. The weeks after that night were a strange, uncharted territory. The mask of the gentle wife was gone, and in its place was a woman I was slowly, reluctantly, beginning to know. Alina's sorrow didn't disappear, it transformed. It became a quiet, fierce energy that she channeled into her work and into her insistence on understanding the world around her. She stopped pretending to be someone she wasn't. She was still polite, still performed her duties, but there was a steeliness to her now, a distance that was both a defense and a declaration of her own identity. It was during this time that I began to notice her fascination with the Apache. She had gotten hold of another book, a better one this time. It was a worn, dog-eared copy of an old soldier's memoir, which she'd traded a jar of my best preserves for at the general store. She'd read it by the firelight, her lips moving silently as she absorbed the soldier's often contradictory and brutal accounts of the very people he was sent to subdue. The book was full of the same prejudice, but buried within it were fragments of truth, moments of honest observation that painted a picture of a complex, resilient people. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon, a rare moment of stillness after a long morning of mending fences when I found her on the porch. She was sketching. She'd become an avid artist, filling her journal with detailed drawings of the flora and fauna of the prairie. But today she wasn't drawing flowers. She was drawing a figure. A man, lean and tall, with a bearing of absolute stillness, wearing a simple cloth shirt and a headband. His face was in profile, sharp and dignified, a look of stoic watchfulness etched into his features. "Is that an Apache?" I asked, leaning against the porch rail. The question felt strange, speaking their name aloud in the context of art rather than as a distant threat or a historical footnote. She looked up, her expression not surprised but focused. Yes, a warrior. I saw him last week. He was on a ridge just watching the ranch. He was there for an hour and then he was gone. He was so still. Her voice was full of an almost reverent awe. My blood chilled. An Apache? Here. Why didn't you tell me? The stories I had grown up with, the whispered tales of raiding parties and unspeakable brutality, surged to the forefront of my mind. She shrugged, a gesture of dismissive practicality that I was learning to recognize. He wasn't doing anything. He was just observing. I think he was making sure we weren't a threat. A threat to whom? I scoffed. Us. We're the ones with the land, the cabin, the herd. We're the settlers. And what are they, Thomas? She asked, her voice deceptively calm. What are the people whose land this was? Are they just a memory now, a story in your father's book? She held my gaze, her green eyes challenging. I had no answer for her. I felt the weight of my own beliefs, the foundation of my life, and it felt suddenly, terrifyingly, fragile. It was as if she had taken my carefully constructed world and shown me the cracks that had always been there. She's not the only one watching, I said, my voice gruff, trying to regain my footing. That's their way, to watch, to wait. They've been doing it for a long time. She smiled a small, sad smile. Yes, they have been watching a long time, and they are still here. Survivors, Thomas, a people who have endured more than you or I can possibly imagine. That night's sleep was impossible. Eleanor's words gnawed at me, and the image of her sketch, the proud, watchful warrior, was burned onto my eyelids. I tossed and turned, images of the past mixing with fears of the present. I was the descendant of a generation that had fought these people, had taken their land, had driven them to the brink of annihilation. And now, a woman from Boston was here, asking me to see them not as ghosts or monsters, but as people. How could I reconcile that with the man I thought I was? A sound outside broke through my internal turmoil, a low, rhythmic hum. At first I thought it was the wind, but it was too melodic, too purposeful. I slipped out of bed, my heart pounding, and moved to the window. My breath caught in my throat. Eleanor was standing in the middle of the yard, bathed in the pale light of a half-moon. Her arms were raised above her head, her hands open and facing the sky. She was rocking back and forth, and the sound I had heard was a song. It wasn't a song I knew. It was an ancient, mournful melody, full of longing and loss. It was a woman's song, a song of the earth, the wind, and the spirit of a people. It was an Apache song. I watched her, frozen, a wave of shock and a strange, profound awe washing over me. How did she know that? How could she possibly know that? The scholarly books, the sketches, they were one thing, but this was something entirely different. This was an incantation, a prayer, a channeling of a history that was not her own. As she sang, I saw the silhouette of a figure on the ridge beyond the property line. It was the same warrior from her sketch, standing motionless, watching her. And for one eternal moment, he raised a hand in a gesture that could have been a greeting or a blessing, before turning and disappearing into the night. She stopped singing and slowly lowered her arms. She didn't turn to look at me. She just stood there, her back to the cabin, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. A terrible, life-altering understanding dawned on me. I walked out to her, my boots crunching on the dry earth, and I placed a hand on her shoulder. She flinched at my touch but didn't pull away. Eleanor, how do you know that song? She took a long, shuddering breath. My grandmother, she whispered, her voice broken. She was what they called a breed, a half-breed. Her father was a white man, a soldier. Her mother was Apache. They were both killed in a raid. She paused, the words seeming to cost her immense effort. My grandmother was taken in by a family in town, raised as a white woman, taught to forget. But before she died, she told me. She told me who she was. She told me the stories. She taught me the songs. She said, never forget, child, never forget where you come from. They can take your name. They can take your home. They can take your life, but they cannot take your soul. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All of her anger, her sorrow, her deep connection to this land and its original people. It all made a horrifying, heartbreaking sense. She hadn't just come to the West seeking adventure. She had come home. She had come to a land that was her ancestral home, only to find it occupied by the descendants of the people who had destroyed her own family. "I sent for a gentle woman," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "And I got a woman who carries a war in her soul." She let out a small, hollow laugh. "Yes, you did." She finally turned to face me. The moonlight illuminated her tears, and in her eyes I saw a profound exhaustion, a lifetime of keeping a secret that had been eating her alive. "All those books," I continued, my mind racing. "The questions about the old battles, the history. You weren't just a curious historian. You were trying to find a piece of yourself." She nodded, her gaze meeting mine with a strange, vulnerable honesty. "I was trying to find the ghost of my ancestors. I was hoping they would show me who I was supposed to be." She gestured out at the prairie. "I came here because I was hoping to find a remnant of my mother's people, a sign that they had survived, that a part of me survived. I thought if I could find them, I could find peace." "And you found them watching you from the ridge," I said, a note of incredulity in my voice. She shook her head, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "No, I found them in a song my grandmother taught me. I found them in the wind that blows across the plains. I found them in the way the earth feels when you walk on it." She looked at me, and for the first time the hard edges of her anger softened. "I found them in you, Thomas, in the way you were so lost yourself." I felt a wave of emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't love, not yet. It was a deep, resonant understanding, a shared loneliness. The cowboy who was more comfortable with cattle than people, and the woman who had been carrying the weight of a lost heritage all her life. We were both looking for something we couldn't name. We were both prisoners of our own making. I took her hand, her small, cold hand in my own. "The man on the ridge," I said, my voice low. "He saw you. He heard you." She looked at me, her green eyes wide and searching. "What are you saying, Thomas?" "I'm saying," I began, the words forming in my mind as I spoke them, "that maybe our story isn't the one my father's book wrote. Maybe it's not the story you've been told your whole life either. Maybe—" I trailed off, the enormity of the thought overwhelming me. She squeezed my hand, a silent gesture of encouragement, of solidarity. "Maybe we get to write a new one," I finished, the words feeling like a prayer. We stood there in the moonlight, two strangers who had been brought together by a fraud, bound by the sudden, shocking truth of Alina's past. In the distance, a coyote yipped, a sound I had always heard as a threat, but now it sounded different. It sounded like a call, a cry of defiance, a reminder that this land was never truly ours. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like a man standing at the beginning of a terrifying, exhilarating new story. 2 days later, the stranger came to my door. I saw him from the barn first, a silhouette against the endless prairie, moving with a silent, fluid grace that I had only ever seen in the wolves that shadowed the herd. He wasn't riding a horse. He was walking, his presence an unannounced and unsettling intrusion upon our isolated world. My first instinct was to reach for my rifle, a habit ingrained in me since childhood. But I stopped myself. I thought of Alina. I thought of her song. I thought of her sketch. This wasn't a threat. This was an answer. He stood by the porch, a man in his late middle age, perhaps older, with skin like weathered leather and eyes that were as dark and deep as the night sky. He wore the simple clothes of a traveler, a faded cotton shirt, worn pants, and a headband of red cloth. He was unarmed as far as I could see. He didn't look at me with hostility. He looked at me with a kind of patient curiosity, as if he were studying an interesting, slightly puzzling insect. Alina came to the door behind me. When she saw him, a sharp gasp escaped her lips. She didn't move away. She stepped forward, walking past me, and stood on the porch. Her posture was different. Her shoulders were back, her chin held high. She looked like a woman confronting a truth she had been running from her entire life. He spoke first, his voice a low, rasping sound like wind over dry grass. "I heard the song," he said, his words precise and deliberate. I have not heard that song in many years. It is a song of my grandmother's people." Alina's breath hitched. "Your grandmother," she echoed, her voice trembling. "I am called Iso," he said, making a small gesture with his hand to his chest. "I was a scout for the soldiers. I have seen your kind come and go. I have seen the land change." His eyes flickered to me for a moment, a hint of something unreadable in their depths. "I saw the white man build his house. I saw him carve a life from the earth. I saw the woman who came to join him. I saw the loneliness in her eyes." His gaze settled back on Alina. "But I did not expect to hear the song." My heart was pounding, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He had been watching us for longer than we knew. The whole time we thought we were alone, we were being observed by this man who was a remnant of a world we had tried to erase. "You are Apache?" Alina asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question was almost absurd. It was the most obvious thing in the world, but she needed to hear him say it. He nodded slowly. "A son of the Chiricahua, my grandfather fought with Geronimo. My father was killed by soldiers when I was a boy. I have seen my people broken and scattered." His voice held no anger, only a deep, unshakable sorrow. "And now I am old, and I see a woman who sings a song that was almost forgotten." "Then you know who I am," she said, her voice breaking. "You know what I am." "I know what you carry," Iso corrected gently. "I know the stories in your heart. I know the sorrow in your blood. That is what I came to see. Not the white woman, not the wife of the rancher, the heart of the song." He walked up the steps, ignoring me, and stood before her. He reached out a hand, his fingers calloused and rough, and gently touched the center of her forehead. "You carry the spirit of our grandmother's child. You carry the memory of the land that was taken. That is a heavy burden for one so young." Alina's shoulders sagged, and a shuddering sob escaped her. She had been so strong, so defiant in the face of a world that didn't understand her, and now, in the presence of this old man, the dam finally broke. He pulled her into an embrace, a simple, comforting gesture that spoke of a kinship that transcended blood. He was a stranger, but he was also a living embodiment of the history she had been desperately searching for. I stood there, a spectator to a reunion that wasn't mine. I felt a strange pang of jealousy. He had given her a comfort I was unable to provide. He stayed for 3 days. We fed him, offered him a bed in the barn, which he refused, choosing instead to sleep under the stars. He sat with Alina on the porch for hours, speaking in a language I couldn't understand, a melodic, rhythmic tongue that was both foreign and hauntingly familiar. His presence unsettled me. He was a ghost from the past, a living, breathing reminder of all the violence and injustice my ancestors had inflicted on his. I was the one who had sent for a wife. I was the one who had built a home on stolen land. And yet, I was the one who felt like an intruder. He listened patiently as she showed him her sketches, her face lighting up with pride when he praised her work. He spoke of the old ways, the names of the stars, the meaning of the wind, the secrets of the animals. He told stories of a time when his people were free, a time of abundance and harmony. He spoke of the betrayal, the broken treaties, the forced marches, the death of a way of life. I found myself listening to these stories from the doorway, unable to tear myself away. They weren't just stories, they were history, a raw, unvarnished account of the suffering that had given birth to my world. I saw the pride and the pain in his eyes. And I felt the weight of my own inherited guilt. I had always thought of the land as mine, but listening to him, I realized I had only ever been a caretaker, a temporary visitor. On the 3rd night, Iso approached me. We were alone in the yard, the light from the cabin windows spilling out onto the grass. Alina was inside, sleeping for the first time in days, a peaceful expression on her face. "You are a good man," he said, his voice low. "I have seen you. You treat the land with respect. You care for the animals. You have a good heart." I shook my head, a bitter taste in my mouth. I am a man who has taken what wasn't his to take. He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "The land is the land," he said finally. "It belongs to no man. It can be cared for or it can be destroyed. You choose to care. That is a good thing. Why are you here, Esau? I asked, the question finally tumbling out. Why are you really here? He turned to look at me, a flicker of something ancient and knowing in his eyes. The woman is my blood. I have felt her sadness from across the plains. She is a lost bird blown off course. I came to tell her she is not alone. I came to tell her she is not lost. He paused, and his gaze became more intense. And I came to warn you. Warn me. A chill ran down my spine. The land is changing, he said, his voice heavy. The soldiers are moving again. There is talk of a final removal, a final break. The old ways are almost gone, but there are others, young men, angry men. They have heard the old stories and they are full of rage. They will not be peaceful. They will not accept the new world. He looked at me, his eyes serious. The past is not dead, Thomas. It is not even past. He left the next morning. He was simply gone when I woke up, a ghost returning to the mist. I found Alina on the porch, a single, small, woven bracelet of horsehair and colored beads in her hand. She was holding it as if it were the most precious object in the world. He gave me this, she said, her voice soft. He said it belonged to his grandmother. It was the same woman whose song I sang. He said it had been waiting for me. She slipped it onto her wrist, the colors vibrant against her skin. He said, "Now you are home." I stood beside her, looking out at the empty prairie. Esau was gone, but his presence remained, a palpable weight in the air. He had given Alina a piece of her soul back. He had given her a family. And he had left me with a warning that echoed in my heart like a drumbeat. A final removal. Young, angry men. The past was not dead. We were no longer two people living a quiet, isolated existence. We were now participants in a larger, more dangerous story. The world was closing in. The safe, manageable life I had tried to build for myself was a fragile illusion. The real battle, the one that had been raging for generations, was not over, and I had a feeling, a cold, terrible certainty, that it was coming to our door. 3 weeks later, the echo of Esau's warning arrived in the form of hoofbeats. At first, they were just a distant rumble, a tremor in the earth that I mistook for a passing storm. But as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and crimson, the rumble became a roar, and the horizon filled with a thundering wave of dark shapes and glinting metal. My heart seized in my chest. It wasn't a handful of angry young men. It was an army. Dozens of riders, the U.S. cavalry, swept across the prairie like a plague of locusts. They were a terrifying sight, a machine of precision and power, their blue uniforms a stark contrast to the golden grasses. They encircled my homestead with practiced efficiency, cutting off any avenue of escape. I watched from the cabin window, my hand shaking as I reached for my rifle. Alina stood beside me, her face pale but her jaw set. She was no longer the fragile creature who had arrived on the train. Esau's gift, the bracelet on her wrist, had given her a strength I didn't know she possessed. The commanding officer dismounted, a portly man with a red, florid face and a mustache so bristly it looked like a caterpillar had died on his upper lip. He pounded on the door. "Open up in the name of the United States Army." I opened the door, the rifle held low but ready. The officer barely glanced at me. His eyes swept over the cabin, the yard, and then settled on Alina. His expression was one of cold, bureaucratic contempt. "Thomas Gray," he barked, not waiting for a reply. "I am Major Finch. I have been ordered to inform you that this land is being repossessed. We are clearing the territory for the final settlement of the lands. Your presence here is an impediment." "Repossessed," I sputtered, disbelief warring with fear. "This is my land. I have a deed. I have a legal claim." Finch laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Your deed is a piece of paper, Gray, and paper is easily burned. This territory is being cleared for the final establishment of a military outpost. We can't have squatters disrupting the construction." I gestured to Alina. "My wife she is expecting a child. We have nowhere to go." The major's eyes narrowed as he looked at her. There was something in his gaze, a flicker of recognition that chilled me to the bone. "Your wife, you say," he drawled. The woman who was seen consorting with a known Apache agitator. The woman who has been singing their war songs and painting their likenesses. He stepped closer to her, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. You are a danger to this community, Miss Vance, or should I say, Miss, whatever your real name is. My blood turned to ice. He knew. He knew who she was, or at least he suspected. The warning from Esau was being realized in the most terrifying way possible. The past wasn't just knocking on the door, it was kicking it down. Alina didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her body tense, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury that I had never seen before. My name is Alina Gray, she said, her voice ringing with defiance. And my ancestors have lived on this land for longer than your uniform has existed. You have no right to be here. The major's face contorted with rage. How dare you speak to me in such a manner, you half-breed wretch. You are a stain on this land. You are everything that is wrong with this territory. You and your kind are a blight. Alina let out a sound that was half laugh, half howl of pure, unadulterated fury. She had been carrying the weight of her secret, the pain of her heritage for her entire life. And in this moment, in the face of this man's bigotry, the dam finally burst. She was no longer a gentle wife, a quiet historian, or a lost soul searching for her past. She was a warrior. You are a small, pathetic man who hides behind his uniform, she spat, her words sharp as shards of glass. My people were living in harmony with this land while your ancestors were still painting themselves blue and worshipping trees. You and your kind have taken everything from us, and you will not take this. You will not take me. She lunged for the major, her small hands balled into fists. It was a foolish, suicidal gesture. She was no match for him or his men, but it was the most heroic, beautiful, defiant thing I had ever seen. Instinct took over. I threw myself in front of her, placing myself between her and the major, my rifle raised. Touch her, I growled, my voice deadly quiet, and I will kill you. The major froze, his eyes widening. He saw the madness in my eyes, the look of a man who had nothing left to lose. The other soldiers shifted uneasily, their rifles now pointed at me. The standoff was a powder keg, a single spark away from total annihilation. And then a lone, haunting sound sliced through the tense silence. It was a voice, clear and high, singing a song. A familiar song, Alina's song. I turned and my heart soared. Over the ridge, appearing as if from the very earth itself, came a small group of riders. At their head was Esau, his dark face resolute. But he was not alone. A dozen other riders flanked him, young men with fierce, painted faces, their eyes burning with a cold, ancient fire. They were the angry young men he had warned me about. They had come, not to fight the army, but to answer a call. They circled the soldiers, their horses snorting and stamping, their presence a terrifying, silent rebuke. The soldiers' discipline wavered. They were trained to fight savages, not this silent, spectral force. Esau rode up to the cabin, stopping a few feet from the major. He said nothing. He just sat there, his gaze locked with the officers. The major's face was ashen. He was a bully, a man who was used to having his way through intimidation. But he was not a fool. He looked at the armed woman, the furious rancher, and the ghostly troop of Apache, and he knew he was outmatched. This wasn't a simple eviction. This was a confrontation he hadn't planned for. This isn't over, he finally snarled, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. You may have won this day, but the army will be back. You cannot hold out against the might of the United States. Then come back, Esau said, his voice a low, unwavering command. Come back and see what happens. This land has been ours since the beginning of time. It will be ours at the end of it. You cannot take what was never yours. The major glared at him, then at Alina, then at me. He saw the utter lack of fear in our eyes. He saw the determination. He could feel the weight of history, the collective fury of a people who had been pushed too far. He gave a curt, jerky nod to his men, and without another word, they turned and rode away. They retreated, leaving us alone on the prairie with the silent warriors who had come to our aid. Esau dismounted. He walked up to Alina and took her hands. There were no words of congratulations, no grand pronouncements. He simply looked at her, his dark eyes full of a profound, ancient respect, and said, "You did well, granddaughter. You honored the song." Alina was crying, tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, of triumph. She had faced her demon and won. She had claimed her heritage and her home. I stood there, my heart pounding, watching the scene unfold. I had come to the West looking for a simple life. I had sent for a gentle wife. Instead, I had found a woman with a soul forged in fire. I had found a people who had been written off as ghosts, who had risen from the ashes to defend their own. And in that moment, I realized that the greatest lesson I had ever learned, the one that would define the rest of my life, was this: the women we think are fragile are often the strongest among us. The people we think are gone are often the most present. And the love we never expected, the love that comes wrapped in pain and defiance, is the only kind worth having. The Apache melted back into the prairie as silently as they had come, leaving behind a profound sense of peace and a changed world. Esau was the last to go. He clasped my shoulder, a surprisingly firm grip, and gave me a single, resolute nod. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of gold and amber. I turned to Alina, the woman I had married for convenience, and saw her in a new light. She was no longer the stranger I had sent for, or the wounded soul I had tried to understand. She was my partner, my home. "I sent for a gentle prairie bride," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I got something I never knew I needed." "And what was that, Thomas?" she asked, her green eyes searching mine. I reached out and gently touched the woven bracelet on her wrist. "A partner," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "A home, a future forged in fire." She smiled, a real, honest smile that reached her eyes. "We will make our own history, Thomas," she said. "A story written in the dust with ink made from our own blood. A story of courage, resilience, and a love that was never meant to be."